So back in, I think it was early 90s, one of my favorite shows, Married with Children. Well, I have obviously a very lowbrow taste for humor. Had a joke which I thought was quite hilarious. There was something that Al did, Al Bundy. And so his next door neighbor, Marcy, walks in and admonishes his wife. And she says, when a chimp shoots someone with a gun, you don't blame the chimp, you blame the idiot who gave him the gun. And of course, Al says, is that a hidden dig at me? Well, in either case, whether it's a dig at Al Bundy, let's go back to the U.S. at Trinidad and Tobago. The first goal is universally blamed on Omar Gonzalez. OG scored an OG. It's a very unfortunate name for a defender. Well, at least initials for a defender. Nonetheless, Omar Gonzalez was only partially to blame, almost none to blame. Even though he did slice the ball toward his own net, the trajectory of the ball was high enough so most goalkeepers with any kind of lateral agility or ability to walk without cement shoes would have simply taken two more steps or one more step and intercepted it before the ball went inside the goal, inside the net, into the net. It's in the net, it's in the net. Tim Howard, unfortunately for him, committed two blunders on the same play. First of all, he only took one step, and, second blunder, he misjudged the trajectory of the ball. So once he sees the ball going behind him, he decides to take a jump, and he doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't have the jumping ability, doesn't have the lateral ability, doesn't have the moving ability. And so he is, he's stuck in some sort of a, cement, quagmire, sand pit, quicksand, any of the above. And he doesn't get to the ball, and it goes into the net. So you have, Mark Gonzalez may be responsible for, 20% of that. But Tim Howard responsible for 90% of this. That's right, it's 110%. In the second goal, the guy shoots from like 35 yards from far right, so the flight trajectory is probably over 40 yards. Tim Howard doesn't move. And to show you how live recording. And to show you how incompetent even Trinidadian coaching was, when you see somebody so slow, you choose to test him often. You shoot on goal often. You try to hit the goal lower to the left. Try to hit a ground ball so the guy has to dive, has to move and dive. They really haven't tested him that well. Except that second goal, where the guy shot from about 35 yards, and Tim Howard just went into some sort of a catatonic state for half a second. Then he decides to jump. Once again, he jumps about 2 feet, and the ball goes into the net. Now you think, Tim Howard, and from my previous story, the way I opened it, Tim Howard is just a chimp, and you really blame whoever gave him the gun, which is Bruce Arena. But no, that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is that Bruce Arena is the chimp. Bruce Arena is a known commodity, which is a known mediocrity. And who gave him the gun? Who gave him the opportunity to field overaged players, inferior players, when there were better options available? Arena can only do what Arena does. It was Sunil Gulati and Don Garber who gave Chimp the gun. They appointed Arena. And now this goes back to the firing of Klinsmann. Once again, it's not that he wasn't a worthy consideration for firing, because they did lose 4-0 and they looked miserably, les miserables, doing that. The problem is that they had no replacement, in the sense that they didn't have a better coach. So instead of trying to improve the team, they hired sort of the only guy that was available, which was the same thing that happened in 2006 when Arena resigned, and they tried to get Klinsmann for the first time, and they didn't get him, and so they hired Bradley, and then Bradley proceeded to muck up things from that point on. And so the firing Klinsmann this time, not because they have a better candidate, and there are probably quite a few better candidates to run a national team. But what happened is that they fire him sort of to spite Klinsmann, because they think anybody can qualify out of CONCACAF. We'll get Bruce Arena and then we'll see where it goes. It's like Klinsmann said, anybody can play left back. Well, anybody can coach the US team because, it's an easy region, it's an easy continent, there are 4 slots, blah, 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 blah. And Arena had done it before. They're the guys who give Chimp the gun, let me remind you. Now, if you look at 2002 World Cup, which was sort of Arena's shining moment, Costa Rica at the time had, I believe, only one player with experience in the foreign league. That was Paulo Van Chope, who played for Manchester United and West Ham and and actually a pretty decent player in Europe, although by the time 2002 started, I think he was back in Costa Rica because he had bad knees and he sort of had to recover. And then, he was playing for like somebody, Alajuelense or something. Alajuelense. Mexico at the time, and we're talking about CONCACAF, had 3 players with very minor European experience. It was Gerardo Torrado, who stayed with them for a long time. What's his name? Cuauhtemoc Blanco, and Paco Palencia. And Paco Palencia had a little bit more than a cup of coffee. He actually got into some games, I think, with Espanyol, whereas Cuauhtemoc Blanco and Gerardo Torrado was sort of like on a very low rank and didn't hear a lot of minutes, and they sort of came back to Mexico saying, well, we didn't make it in Spain. Well, it itches. We didn't make it in Spain. We go and play now in home territory, and everybody's going to treat us well and pay us good money. And 3 players. There are 23 players on the World Cup roster. Only 3 players in Mexico in 2002 had any sort of European experience, and even that was marginal. Now Mexico can field pretty much 15 players with European experience, roughly. Some, of course, didn't succeed, they came back, and they may not be in favor anymore. But it's a different ball of wax. These Mexican players, like Herrera, like Chicharito, it's not Helene Herrera, but like Moreno, who plays for Roma now, even Memo Ochoa, who's really not a horrible goalkeeper, he's not a great goalkeeper. But all these guys have decent European experience, and experience in leagues much better than Liga MX, much better than their local league. They're coming in, and a lot of them have, especially like Aquino and Herrera and Layun. Those guys play Champions League's ball. I mean, they are quite battle-tested. In other words, and the same kind of goes true for Costa Rica. They have 5 or 6 players that have played in Europe. Some have come back. Some are in MLS. Some are still out there in Europe. In other words, CONCACAF as a region moved upwards. Players are more experienced. Coaches can do more. Everything is done on a much higher plateau, except in the U.S., which clings to its old Bruce Arena is the king of MLS notion. And so that notion, as I mentioned in the previous rants, that notion ought to have been refuted by Bob Bradley's experience with Egypt and with Swansea, or Bruce Arena's experience with LA Galaxy. Plane flying overhead. High. They failed. But the chimps, they're the chimps. Who gave them the gun? Once again, the people who gave them the gun are still there. Don Garber is still there. Sunil Gulati is still there. So what is hope? What kind of a hope does an American soccer fan have that these people will quit making idiotic decisions and now will make something more educated? After all, they already are known for giving the chimp that gun. The chimp is the chimp, but the people who gave him the gun are also one and the same.